The courtroom had no memory. It processed lives like paper, wrinkled, filed, forgotten. Men like Walter Grady were not supposed to be remembered there. There were case numbers, docket entries, another theft of property less than $250 on a Tuesday morning in Brooklyn. But Walter sat differently than most. Not out of pride or defiance, but with the quiet endurance of someone who had once stared down a storm and come out carrying the wounded. His clothes were the same as yesterday, a faded green jacket 2 sizes too large, pants with threadbare knees, and boots that had walked more than one kind of battlefield. The only clean thing he wore was a set of old dog tags, dulled with age but still legible to anyone who had served. The court staff barely looked at him. The defense attorney didn't shake his hand, didn't ask questions. Just ran through a standard script about pleading guilty and moving things along. The prosecutor, a man younger than most of Walter's memories, stood to speak. He shuffled his notes with the efficient boredom of someone who had said it all 100 times before. "Your Honor," he began, "the defendant was observed on security footage removing a loaf of bread from a local market. Given Mr. Grady's previous record of petty theft and his lack of permanent residence, the state recommends continued detention until trial." The recommendation was made without malice. It was simply mechanical. Walter said nothing in return. No protest, no defense, no appeal to sympathy. Just a quiet nod as if the verdict had already been written elsewhere, long before the court or the arrest or the surveillance mirror. He had already pleaded guilty. The judge, Michael Carmichael, barely glanced at the man before him. He was known for his punctuality and clipped decisions. The docket was long. His robe felt heavier than morning, though he couldn't say why. His fingers flipped through the file. Walter Edward Grady. Born 1957. Honorably discharged. No fixed address. Prior citations for vagrancy and minor theft. No family on record. No income. It was supposed to be a quick judgment. Then something in the file caught his eye. A military discharge sheet, tucked between fingerprint records and intake notes. Faded, folded too many times. Staff Sergeant. U.S. Army. Service from 1983 to 2004. 3 deployments. Michael paused. He didn't often read beyond what was necessary. But a name in the back of his mind stirred, like a photo catching light after years in a dark box. He read further. Bronze Star, 2003. Fallujah. His throat tightened. His hand, always steady, began to tremble. He looked again at the man before him. Old now. Weathered. But the eyes were the same. He remembered them from a battlefield blurred by smoke and fear. Walter had saved him. Not metaphorically. Not in some abstract, patriotic sense. But literally. One burning Humvee, one desperate run through mortar fire, and one staff sergeant carrying him half-conscious on his back. Michael had been a young medic then, fresh out of school, unprepared for what war actually was. He would have died if Walter hadn't refused to leave him. Walter never knew who he carried. He just carried. Michael rose. The courtroom went still. No one understood why. Judges didn't stand in the middle of misdemeanor hearings. Clerks looked up. The bailiff straightened. "We'll recess," he said abruptly, voice dry. He didn't look at Walter again before leaving. His face had turned pale. In chambers, he opened a drawer that hadn't been touched in years. Inside, a photo bent at the corners, his old unit standing in the Iraqi desert. 20 soldiers, weary but standing. Dust in their boots. Fire in the distance. And in the back row, Walter. Shoulders square, mouth set, as if guarding every soul in the frame. Michael sat down slowly. It had been more than 20 years since that day. He remembered the ride in the evac chopper. The bandages. The way Walter never spoke a word, just kept him alive. He searched a military database on his computer. Walter's record came up slowly, classified in parts, redacted in others. But there it was, Fallujah, convoy ambush, 17 lives saved. Walter had driven a supply truck engulfed in flames out of the K*LL zone to divert fire from his team. No one wrote about it. No medals were paraded. He was just sent home. Quietly. Then came the record of Margaret Grady. His wife. Deceased, 2008. Cause, metastatic cancer. Delayed diagnosis. VA oversight noted. And then, nothing. No benefits claimed. No appeals filed. No addresses after 2009. Walter had vanished. Michael Carmichael pressed his hands to his face and sat in silence. Not as a judge. Not as a man of the law. But as someone who had once depended on Walter to live. And now had nearly sentenced him to rot in a holding cell over a loaf of bread. He returned to the courtroom 10 minutes later, eyes fixed ahead. Walter hadn't moved. The room was quiet now. Even the prosecutor was watching the judge with a puzzled expression. Michael sat down, but didn't open the file. He looked at Walter fully for the first time. Walter didn't speak. He didn't need to. Somewhere in the silence, recognition passed between them. The past had arrived, not as a headline or a ceremony, but as a courtroom pause long enough for dignity to breathe. The courtroom resumed, but the rhythm had changed. Something in the air felt heavier, as though the silence between gavel strikes now carried weight. Judge Carmichael didn't mention the photo tucked away in his drawer or the scar that still crossed his thigh, a silent souvenir from a war long forgotten by most but not by him. He cleared his throat and adjusted his robe with the careful precision of a man trying to stay composed. "Mr. Grady," he said finally, "you've pled guilty. But before I determine sentencing, I'd like to ask the prosecutor to approach the bench." The young man looked surprised. This wasn't protocol. He rose quickly, smoothing his tie, and walked forward. Judge Carmichael lowered his voice. "What do you know about this man's military record?" The prosecutor blinked. "Only what's in the file, Your Honor. Petty theft, 2 prior arrests, no current employment." "Not that file," the judge said quietly. "The real one. His DD-214. Bronze Star. Fallujah. 2003. The prosecutor hesitated, unsure whether it was a rhetorical question. "I wasn't aware." "You are now," the judge said, and waved him back to his seat. The courtroom didn't understand what was happening, but instinctively leaned forward, sensing something had shifted. Walter remained seated, eyes steady. Not humbled, not expectant, just present. That was always his strength. He showed up. He endured. Judge Carmichael turned to the bailiff. "Bring the defendant forward." Walter rose slowly. The movement cost him something. Pain, likely. Maybe memory. He stepped to the stand with a limp that no one had noticed before. The bailiff didn't need to guide him. He knew where to stand. The judge studied him, then leaned slightly forward. "Is there anything you want to say before I pass sentence?" Walter met his gaze. His voice was low, like gravel softened by time. "No excuses. Just did what I had to. I was hungry." "And if given another chance," the judge asked, though the words already felt unnecessary. "I'd probably still be hungry," Walter said. "But I wouldn't take anything again. I just didn't want to die in the cold." There was no plea for mercy. No self-pity. Just facts. A statement of existence from someone who'd already lost everything worth bargaining for. The judge nodded slowly. Then something extraordinary happened. He stepped down from the bench. No robe. No elevation. Just a man walking across a courtroom floor toward someone who once carried him over one. The prosecutor looked baffled. The clerk stopped typing. Even the public defender, who had said little, sat up straighter. Carmichael stood beside Walter, turned to face the court, and spoke. 15 years ago, this man carried me 2 miles under fire after our convoy was hit outside Fallujah. I was barely conscious. He never asked who I was. He just carried me." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "I woke up in a hospital in Baghdad with burns and shrapnel in my leg. I learned later that 17 others survived because of what Staff Sergeant Grady did. No parade. No headlines. Just paperwork. And then he vanished." Walter looked at the floor, uncomfortable with the attention. The judge continued. "We don't usually see men like this in court. Not because they don't fall, many do. But because the system loses them. And we forget." He looked directly at the prosecutor. "I want this record amended. Not erased, amended. Context matters. This man served. And sacrificed. And he deserves something more than a cell." The prosecutor nodded, words failing him. Carmichael turned back to Walter. "No sentence today. Case dismissed." There was no cheer, no applause. Just silence, the kind that meant something had been restored. Walter didn't react. He nodded slightly and turned to leave. But just as he stepped toward the doors, they opened. A young woman in uniform entered, army dress blues, crisp and decorated. She paused, scanning the room, then spotted Walter. She walked straight toward him and stopped. "Staff Sergeant Grady," she said, her voice composed but clearly rehearsed. "On behalf of the United States Army, I've been authorized to present you with a service recognition coin for extraordinary conduct and life-saving action during classified operations in 2003. She held out her hand. And it rested a coin, black enamel, gold trim, and the emblem of a Special Operations Division. Walter hesitated. Then accepted it. She stepped back and saluted. Walter raised a trembling hand to return the gesture, though it lacked the crispness of his younger days. The entire room stood, not instructed, not ordered. They simply stood. Even the judge. Even the young prosecutor. Even the officer who had cuffed him the night before. Somewhere in the back, a clerk quietly began to cry. Walter turned and walked out, leaving the courtroom not as a defendant, but as something else entirely. And no one who remained inside would ever forget what had just taken place. The courthouse door clicked shut behind him. Outside, the Brooklyn morning was gray with mist, the kind that made streetlights look like floating orbs. Walter stepped onto the sidewalk, his boots finding rhythm once more. No one followed. No one needed to. The story had already begged *N to walk ahead of him. By noon, a courtroom intern had posted a short paragraph online, anonymously, cautiously. Just a fragment. Today, a judge stepped down from the bench and dismissed the case of a homeless veteran who once carried him through enemy fire. No name. No video. But the story caught like dry leaves in the wind. Within hours, that post had been shared across veteran forums, military communities, and city channels. People dug. And they found him. Photos emerged, old grainy snaps *TS from the early 2000s. A man in uniform, stoic and uncelebrated, always in the background. His name appeared in obscure citations and long-buried mission briefings. Some had served with him. Others had only heard rumors of a supply driver who once drove a burning truck out of AK*LL zone. By sunset, Walter Grady's name trended on social media. But Walter didn't see it. He had no phone. No computer. He spent that evening where he always did, behind a church shelter near the corner of DeKalb and Spencer, his coat zipped to his chin, the service recognition coin wrapped carefully in a handkerchief inside his pack. That night, a city councilor showed up unannounced to the shelter. She was young, dressed in running shoes and a sharp blue blazer, holding a clipboard and confusion. She asked for Walter Grady by name. When someone pointed him out, she approached slowly, unsure how to greet a man who had suddenly become a living legend. He didn't stand. He just looked up. "I saw what happened today," she said. "I didn't believe it. But then I saw the judge's statement. Walter gave a soft nod. He had nothing to add. We're updating city records to reflect your veteran status, she continued. I've already contacted the VA. A caseworker will meet you here tomorrow. We've secured a temporary room for you at the Armory Veterans Housing Center. Walter remained silent. And I just wanted to thank you, she added awkwardly. What you did, what you've done, it matters. Walter looked down at his boots, scuffed and frayed. Then he nodded again. Kindness doesn't need speeches. The next morning, a reporter arrived at Morelli's Corner Market. He asked the owner about the incident with the stolen bread. Mr. Morelli, now visibly uncomfortable, stammered his way through a statement about store policy and public safety. But the damage was done. The neighborhood turned cold toward the shop. A hand-lettered sign appeared on the window a day later, "We stand by our veterans." Someone crossed out "stand by" and wrote "failed." Across town, the Brooklyn Municipal Courthouse installed a framed photo in its main hallway, black and white, simple. A courtroom still image, the moment Judge Carmichael stood beside Walter at the bench. Below it, a small brass plaque read, "Sometimes justice remembers." Walter didn't attend the unveiling. He spent the morning in a quiet room at the Armory Center, sipping coffee from a chipped mug and listening to a caseworker explain his benefits. He barely responded. Just sat with a strange calm, as if everything happening now had already happened long ago in his mind. Weeks passed. Then, a photo went viral, Walter seated at a folding table at a small VA job fair, wearing a clean jacket, the coin in his pocket. He wasn't speaking, just listening to a younger vet talk about job training. The caption said nothing, but the comments did. "I met him. He helped my brother when no one else would. He used to walk past my cafe. Never said a word. Now I know why he looked so tired. I was in his unit. He never told stories. He just got us home." Even the city's mayor made a statement. Walter Grady's story reminds us of something we forget in politics, and policy, and everyday life. Some heroes go unrecognized not because they fail, but because we fail to look. Then came a letter. Delivered by hand. Not from the VA. Not from a politician. From Judge Michael Carmichael. It was just one paragraph, typed on court letterhead, signed in blue ink. "You saved my life once in Fallujah. And again in court last week. I'm ashamed it took me this long to stand up for you. From now on, I will." It was folded carefully and slipped inside the same handkerchief where Walter kept his coin. He carried both with him from that day on, small symbols of a life reawakened, not restored but reclaimed. The bench near the shelter remained. So did the streets he once walked as a ghost. But people saw him differently now. A nod. A thank you. A folded meal left beside his resting place. Nothing grand. Just recognition. Walter never asked for more. He didn't want a parade. He only ever wanted warmth, dignity, and the memory of a wife whose grave he hadn't visited in years. One day, he did. Clean clothes. Trimmed beard. A bus ticket in his coat pocket. He stood at her stone for an hour in silence. Then he sat on the grass and whispered, just once, "I made it through." Because sometimes, that's the entire victory. Not being celebrated. Not being rescued. Just making it through.